Good evening. I'm Paul. I am a beer enthusiast and sometimes a drunk. This is Dave. He is a beer judge certified, and he is a home brewer. And we are here to talk about beers. And this evening we are doing a beer called a Tripel Karmeliet. I'll show you the bottle here.
Or Karmeliet, if you pronounce it that way.
Karmeliet, depends on what you look up. It is a 8.3?
8.4, I believe.
8.4 alcohol by volume beer. And it is one of those beers that wins a lot of awards all the time. And with that being said, I'm going to turn you over to Dave here because this is Dave's wheelhouse, and he will talk at great length about it without me sounding like a doofus.
This is probably one of my favorite beers of all time. If you're familiar with Belgian beers, this is a Belgian beer. It's brewed from a monastery, which a lot of the Belgian breweries are monastery brewed. It's actually not currently, I think, brewed
Keep talking.
by a monastery, but the recipe itself comes from a monastery. This specifically is a 3-grain, so it uses wheat, malt, so barley malt, and oat in the recipe. By far, it is definitely in my top 3, and we've done a number of my top 3 recently, which are just phenomenal, and just an amazing beer. If you haven't had like this style of beer, the Belgian Tripel, I've never been disappointed in all of the Belgian Triples. So while this one is by far, I think, the best example of it, if you ever see a Belgian Triple at one of your local breweries or sitting on a shelf, or even if it's just like your favorite commercial brewer is making a triple, Belgian Triple, you should try it purely for the experience. I've been never disappointed with any triple, regardless of who's brewed it. And this Tripel Karmeliet is by far probably one of my favorite of all time.
Yeah, it's a 3-grain beer. It's got the wheat, barley, and oats going in it. And this beer is from 1871, this company. And they basically were making the same recipe, and they said the recipe was from the 1600s, actually?
Yeah, like 1679, which the history is really interesting when you get into some of these monasteries. Really just worked and tried to perfect, brewing. You have in Belgium what's considered a Trappist. It's almost like a union of different breweries, which are monasteries that brew beer. And they have worked on it just nonstop on trying to perfect it. Some of the best beers in the world come from Belgian breweries, voted on a regular basis. This is not a Trappist, but it is by one of my favorite beers of all time.
Now, one thing I will say is that the rumor, I have no idea what the validity of it is the monks would fast, and they would survive basically off the calorie content of the beers that they would be drinking. So
yeah,
it's going to probably be on the heavier side.
One of my more favorite beers is what's considered the double bock, and we got to do a double bock. I've got actually one in the garage right now, but double bock, there's a history to it where the monk that really kind of developed the style wrote a letter to the Pope asking permission to make this beer because this beer was so good he felt guilty for drinking it, and the Pope gave him permission to continue to make that beer. So that's how serious they took it, trying to create perfection in their pursuit of greatness.
Yeah. So this beer actually is got a cage on the cork here.
Yep.
So we will untwist this and get the cage off of it.
So bottle conditioned is when you're carbonating. There's really 2 main ways. One of it is to
Pop the cork on that baby.
That was not wasting any time. That's going to be highly carbonated for sure. So one of the ways that they go about it is you can take it in solution in a keg and you can put it under pressure. It'll absorb the CO2 from a CO2 tank. Traditional method to do it, and the way that they obviously would have done it in time period, they're going to put in a little bit more of the barley, or we'll say mainly the barley. The yeast is going to be living in it anyways. They're going to give it a little bit more sugar, right? So the barley and all that is the sugar content, the malts and the wheat and everything. They're going to put a little bit more in the solution, but just enough so that it gives the yeast something to eat. The yeast will put off CO2, and because it's under pressure, it's going to hold that under pressure. The solution is then going to absorb the CO2 and carbonate the solution. It's a fascinating kind of process. That would be traditionally how it had been done, even if it was done in a barrel or a cask. One of the other interesting things about a lot of Belgian beers is they'll use actually Belgian sugars to create the higher alcohol. So it's like rock candy, because it'll create a sweetness. So it's really common in the Belgian styles to use Belgian candy sugar to create the higher alcohol amounts. But this may actually be a pure malt driven beer.
Well, I'll let you pour first. Since
Absolutely.
It's your baby.
Me. Go ahead and pour yours first.
Oh, what a gentleman. He's going to use the practice pour on me. That's how we work as friends. We pour each other's beer first so they get the practice pour. Because see, look at how heady that is. Now he's going to be like, okay, welcome. I know we can do a little slower on mine and I can get less of a head and it'll look a little prettier and what have you.
Yeah. So this is very highly carbonated, which is also very characteristic of Belgian beers. This is very light colored. So obviously wheat is a very light malt. You don't have
that's like a Coors almost for the coloring right there.
Yeah. Yeah, very light colored, lots of proteins in that. I'm expecting some really, really strong lacing down the side. You can just see the carbonation like champagne.
It's got a light smell to it.
It says that you would drink this like you would drink champagne. So we're coming up to the first of the year. I would much more rather have a bottle of this than a bottle of champagne.
Yeah,
I like champagne.
I'm not a big champagne guy myself. To me, it's a white wine and sparkling, and I don't care too much for too much fizz. A and B, I don't care for white wines. So
yeah.
But New Year's Eve, you drink champagne.
It's got a great malty smell, but there is also a little bit of estery yeast to it.
I think it's more on the yeasty side.
Yeah, it's got some good yeast characteristic, but for as light of a beer that you're looking, like it is really, really light colored
and clear.
The malts that are in it.
This is clear. There is no fogginess in this at all.
So obviously you can filter beer. This is probably not filtered, but it's probably aged really well.
As you can see, we got lacing going on, even as the head's going down. So. But it does have a very pleasant aroma. Light, crisp aroma.
Yeah, very light, almost like a honey floral note. I mean, it's got some of that maltiness to it, but it's not like a dark maltiness. It's just got a great, great smell to it.
It's not a heavy mouthfeel. It's pretty clean and pretty crisp. It's got a nice flavor. It's not heavy in any particular direction, although the flavors are strong. It's not like hop-centric or malt-centric or whatever. This is...
It's not bitter by any means. It's definitely, it's not like super on the sweet side, but it is definitely leaned more sweet than it is bitter.
We actually didn't find the IBU rating on this one.
No, I didn't see it. But I would expect it to be probably 20, somewhere at 20, maybe 30, in the low range when it comes to bittering units. The aroma, I think, is probably one of the
this is nice
characteristics that I like the most. And this is probably a big contributor to the fact that it is multiple types of grains. Oats are going to create a really smoothness. Your wheat creates a real bready kind of character. but it also helps with the yeast, and it keeps it light. So anything time you have anything that's like wheat in it, it tends to be pretty light, but with a lot of character to your Belgian yeasts are a little bit more wild, so they have a lot more character to it. It's not going to be something that's really subdued. It's really going to come out there, and I think that's what we're picking up, along with some of that like wheat, some of that malt, and obviously probably the
Very mild aftertaste. There's a very, very mild aftertaste to it. It's clean, like I said. It's on, it's in. You know, there's a lingering presence in your mouth about it, but it's not an aftertaste presence. It's kind of a coating that's not. It's not unpleasant. It's very nice.
Yeah, and I think that's from the yeast itself. So as I'm kind of swishing it around, I'm tasting a little bit of that yeast.
Yeah,
So
we were actually earlier while we were looking this up, we were talking about preserving yeast cultures, and there are bread companies that have yeast cultures that are hundreds of years old. And to be honest, I would not be surprised to find out that this brewery is running the same yeast culture the entire time it's been running in general. Like,
yeah, it may have actually isolated yeast that was common in the area of where it was originally brewed, which was at a monastery in the 1600s. Very common. They did. Today we choose a yeast. We go, okay, great. I want that yeast with this recipe, these hops, and there you go. There's my beer. Back in the day, they would have just chosen a recipe with the hops and the malts, and the yeast would have been living in the air. In some areas made good beer, and some areas didn't make good beer, and it kind of evolved from there. And people's flavors that they liked or characteristics they liked, they would choose through the market, right? They would go, wow, I really like this, they'd buy it. You may brewed it in a different area that had bad yeast and they wouldn't buy your beer. And you really had nothing to do with it.
yeah, and the grains they use obviously are really high in protein content because the lacing on this glass is
Yeah.
it's incredible. Like this is not the best lacing, but this is easily right up there as far as looking at the lacing on the glass. Um, the beer itself, like I said, it's not real thick. It doesn't show legs. It doesn't do any of that stuff. We've had some drinks that do, but it's very nice, and it definitely is on the fizzier side, but they're very small bubbles and they're not really obtrusive. So even myself, who prefers his beer on the more flat side, this is this is good. This is
Yeah.
very well done.
The mouthfeel on it is not real heavy.
It's got excellent flavor. It's got that lightness that American light lagers are going to have. Your Budweiser, your Coors. It's not on that far end of it. But imagine if your Coors or your Budweiser didn't taste like it was watered down.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way I would describe this. Like if that beer wasn't watered down, or your Corona or whatever was not watered down, this would have that have it would add in a certain thickness that I think is really, well, it's not heavy, it's not strong, it's very pleasant.
The smell, the look, the taste, the mouthfeel. There's so many of these different aspects of enjoying the beer that kind of come together to create the experience. And this is one that does a really good job of it. It's not over anywhere in a bad way. So it's not overly bitter, it just has just enough. It's not like trying to
It's
play
like
the middle.
there's very little bittering in this,
Yeah.
I think.
It tends to lean towards the sweetness, but it's not overly sweet. It has some great yeasty characteristics, which create a great smell and some good kind of ale characteristics when it comes to the taste. Good carbonation level. That small, tiny bubbles. Nice head on it. It's a good, clean white head.
Thinking about this, remember the Budweiser commercials with the Clydesdales? Those were some beautiful freaking horses, by the way. But they always show it like the beer with the right fizz, and you kind of pour a Budweiser, and it doesn't quite look as good as it does in the commercial. This beer has actually hitting all that.
Mm-hmm.
Like literally, it's hitting all that right out the get go. And honestly, this is very much caught me off guard for being this good.
Yeah. I mean, this is obviously, and I kind of cheated a little bit from the aspect of I've had this beer multiple times. And as a home brewer, as a beer judge, as a beer enthusiast, it's one that I've gone to quite often in my life as probably one of my more favorite styles of beer. The actual beer recipe itself, is a fantastic example, and it's by far one of my favorites. I'm glad that we're enjoying it.
Here's one thing I do want to say too, though. This bottle, I bought this. This was $20, and this is fantastic. Um, yeah, people think about beer at a certain price point, but you know what? This is probably one of the best beers ever, and it's $20. How many people can say they've had a wine that was one of the best wines ever that was $20?
Mm-hmm.
So, you get into a really high quality whiskey, you're paying $100 for a bottle,
Yeah.
The whiskey I like is a Belvini double cask, and we'll do it here on the show, I'm sure. It's like $75 or something like that out the door. And that's one thing I have to say I really enjoy about beers is you can get some really good stuff. And yeah, it's not cheap when you look at it as a beer cost, but when you look at different booze costs, this is not unreasonable. This is something I could actually drink. Like I could probably suck through two of these.
Mm-hmm.
I would be hammered, but I could suck through two of these and not actually mind it.
It's very approachable for anyone who loves a good beer. From a presentation standpoint, I'm going to be obviously towards the upside of it. I'm on right about 9.5.
Are you? I'm gonna go a 9.75.
You're up at 9.75, yeah.
Yeah, this
And
is
the only
reasonably as close to a 10 as I've had yet.
yeah, and it's really close for me, and that's pretty high from my judging standpoint. But the reason why I put it at 9.5 is that generally, if I would just look at the beer, I like the ruby red character of a beer. So when I see lighter beer, it's immediately giving me an impression. It's super clear. It's got great carbonation. It's got great head. The lacing is, good, though it could be a little bit better. But from a commercial example, I don't know if you could get much better without
See, I'm at the 9.75 because, like I said, you see those commercials for beer and it looks amazing, and then you pour the beer into the glass when you've actually bought it and it doesn't look quite so good. And this beer, it looks like what you would expect.
It actually,
The
I think, makes
smell
me a
is-
better person. I think it makes me want to be a better person. Like,
The
I
smell,
smell it and like, I want to do good things in the world.
the smell is very reminiscent of the taste. And speaking of the taste, as far as taste is concerned, I'm gonna go with a 9.5 on this one. The taste. We keep our records here, but the taste is fantastic. It's just I'm not giving it a higher rating purely because it's not my personal preference as far as what I like for taste. But this beer it's balanced, it's crisp, it's light, it's not going to weigh you down. At the same time, it's got a lot of very good flavor.
Yeah, when it comes to taste on this for me, and I agree, is I'm at a 9.8, and I'm going to put it up there with some of the other ones that I really, really enjoy, even though it's a completely different kind of beer. But I'm putting it at 9.8 because I love how light it is, but how full of flavor it is.
Yeah.
It creates a really great balance. It creates this roller coaster of flavors. They're different kind of flavors. They're more maybe yeast driven, and they're smoothed out based on having, maybe some of the oats and some of the barley and the wheat in there. but it creates like the perfect balance of these characteristics along with the yeast, and accentuates itself so well that I enjoy it as much as I would enjoy an experience of any number of my top beers that I love.
No, this is good. My overall impression on this beer, I would prefer myself a darker color looking at it. So I'm gonna knock it down a bit, but I'm gonna go with a 9.5 on this one. Again, a 9.5. I seem to be kind of stuck there right now, but it's good looking. It's got an excellent flavor, excellent balance. This is, I want to say, something that a lot of beer snobs like myself and Dave would actually look for in a beer, even though it may not be our first choice. I'm sure it is for Dave. Dave was stupid enthused about it. I have one or two beers I might actually enjoy more than this one, but this is a good solid 9.5. And to me, handing out ratings, if you're much closer to a 10, it's going to be rare.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest.
I agree.
It's going to be rare that you're going to hand me a beer and I'm going to give it a 10 on any level.
For me, like, it's close to a 10 for me. I'm going to throw it up as a 9.8 as an overall impression. I mean, right up there with, like, let's say if there was going to be a last meal, what do you want to drink with it?
You're going to be like, I want this Tripel Karmeliet right here.
Yeah. I mean, it would be right at the top of my list if I was having to make that hard decision. Personal preference. And I put it right in the 10 category. If I see it on a menu, I'm just going to order it. Because
think about it?
I don't want to pass on the opportunity to experience it with any meal. And I think that it would go with, that I probably would choose it to go with any sort of meal that I have.
I can understand that. As far as my personal preference, I'm gonna go with a 9.8. We had another beer before we started doing the rating system that I think I like better, and that one I would call a 9.9. But this is fantastic. I won't turn it down. And to be honest with you, like I said, $20. Yeah. I would pay that for this. This is that good. Well, obviously I did, but I mean, I would do it again. And like I said, I'm thinking about like buying this for Christmas for a couple people because there's still a good week out, and I can pick up a couple more bottles.
Belgian beers have a tremendous experience kind of drinking them. They're unique in comparison to a lot of beers that you're going to have.
I think it's the yeast. You brought that up before. I think honestly, like you've said, even though I like my hoppy beers, you've said this to me numerous times. Like, no, you're a yeast-driven kind of guy, and I think this has a very unique yeast to it, which gives it its own very unique flavor. And then, of course, the fact that you get a bottle like this one that's carbonated bottle, it's nice. Well, at any rate, we have rambled on like a pair of morons who have been drinking too much long enough. So we're going to say cheers, like, subscribe,
comment. Tell us what you like, what you want, what you think of this beer. We'd love to hear it.
We'd love to hear it. Have a good evening.